to the MFG Advocate on IMTS TV. I'm Penny Brown, and today I'm speaking to Sean Dubravik, the Chief Economist at the Consumer Electronics Association. How are you today, Sean?
Good, Penny. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're at the Global Forecasting and Marketing Conference in Detroit, and it was really good to hear your insight on the consumer electronics market. So can you tell us kind of what's the overall landscape of the consumer electronic market from a spending standpoint?
So we're looking at about 2% growth in 2014, growing a little over 1% in 2015. And part of that dynamic is that you have a big swath of the industry that is made up by smartphones, tablets, televisions, computers, and that is a maturing category. And so a lot of the growth drivers are coming from some of these smaller segments.
So specifically kind of from a demographic standpoint, who's spending on electronics now?
So I think one of the things you see happening in consumer electronics, and then also really arguably every consumer market, is that you have, over the last 5 years, the top income earners capturing most of the income gains over that period. And so I think where you've seen a lot of the growth is in some of the discretionary products, some of the purchases that aren't maybe purely necessities, but are discretionary purchases.
So you mentioned some sort of growth categories for specific technologies, and it was things like connected thermostats and wearables, but something you also mentioned were 3D printers, and that makes us very excited just because of the manufacturing interest that's generated from that. So where do you see that going?
We estimate about 100,000 consumer-grade 3D printers will sell this year. Globally, about 65% of them selling in the US. And so we see it as a category that's growing in consumer homes and also broadly. You know, there's a big push today to get 3D printers into schools. About 1% of the 100,000 schools in the country have a 3D printer. So there's a big drive to increase it in the schools. Just like computers, when they started to show up in schools, they then also started to migrate towards homes. The original laptops and even some of the original desktops, you go back and look at some of the original Macs, they had handles in the back and they came with cases so that teachers could take them home on the weekend. Their family gained exposure, other people in the neighborhood gained exposure, and it poured out from that. So I think the same thing will happen with 3D printers. You see them show up in the schools, some of the houses, and then over time people gain more exposure to them. And then you've also got a lot of service bureaus out there, which I think is a really good sign for 3D printers. You've got tech shops popping up all over the place. We just had one open by our office. That gives more consumers exposure to the 3D printers. Still an early, nascent market, but it's growing.
Now you mentioned too that it's going to have a huge presence at the Consumer Electronics Show, so talk a little bit about that.
It is. CES, which happens the second week of January every year in Las Vegas, is really the home for everything technology. It's over 2 million square feet, so it's a ginormous event filled with everything you can imagine. 3D printers showed up about 6 years ago. MakerBot had a very small booth at that time. They were one of the early entrants into that space, and it's grown from there. So this year, there were a tremendous number of companies. Next year, it's expected to grow even further. Everything from consumer-grade printers to things that will show up at retail. I saw printers that will print in mixed materials, whether it's ceramic or sugar or anything else. So you're going to see a lot of experimentation, and I think that's what we want to see with innovation. You want to see experimentation that then drives adoption, drives use cases. All of that is starting to take place today with 3D printers.
So one of the big deals with 3D printing is mass customization, or just customization in general. What sort of impact is that having on production?
So I think one of the things that you see with 3D printers, and I think the basic thought is that, hey, I'm not going to buy something, I'm just going to print it. I think for consumers, that's probably not where we end up. I think what you're going to see consumers try to do is customize the experience that they have. So maybe they go buy a radio or a television from a manufacturer, but then they have the ability to customize it using their 3D printer or maybe a 3D printing service that they order from. So you could imagine that Sony or LG or Samsung offers some of the design features of their product to be customized to consumers through a 3D printer. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We haven't even really begun to open up that opportunity, and we'll see much of that come over the next 5 and 10 years.
All right, so last question here. Not far from here, there's Element Electronics actually making flat screen TVs in the Detroit area, you know, electronics manufacturing in the US. Do you think there's much opportunity for that elsewhere?
I think there's some opportunity. I think if you take that theme of mass customization, there's also a desire and demand to have products quickly. So you want to be in the market as a manufacturer. And if you can provide that customization, that quickness to market, then you know, being in the US, manufacturing in the US for the US market makes a lot of sense. I think we've tended to look at manufacturing in the past as we're either in the US and producing for the world market, or we're in Asia producing for the world market. I think that starts to change. We're going to create manufacturing bases within that market to service that market, to appeal to the attributes that that market wants. And I think that's something you'll see with technology and a wide swath of other industries.
That's true. That is kind of a greater trend in manufacturing to create things closer to the consumer base. So applies to electronics as well. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Sean.
Great to be here with you.
This has been Penny Brown for the MFG Advocate on IMTS TV. Check out our blog at mfgadvocate.com.